The four of them stood on the porch, a soft breeze brushing past them, carrying the faint scent of pine from the nearby woods. The sky above was wide and dark, dotted with stars that seemed unusually bright tonight. Everything around them felt calm, yet charged with the subtle tension of unspoken thoughts. Michael's words, "There's something we've been meaning to ask you both," hung in the air, making Emma's heart skip. She looked at Daniel, whose brows were slightly furrowed, as if trying to predict what would come next. She felt a flutter in her chest she hadn't felt in weeks, a mixture of anticipation, curiosity, and something tenderly exciting. Michael cleared his throat gently, his voice careful. "We've noticed you two seem a little distant lately, and we know how that feels. It's easy to get caught up in work, in responsibilities, in the little things that slowly pull people apart. We've been there ourselves." He paused, looking at Emma and Daniel with genuine concern. "We were thinking, maybe sharing time together tonight. Like this could help all of us feel closer, not just as neighbors, but as friends. People who care. We wanted to ask if you'd be open to that." Emma felt her chest tighten. It wasn't what she expected. It wasn't dramatic or bold, but there was something in Michael's words that struck deep. The idea wasn't just about companionship, was about honesty, openness, and trust. About letting others in, not in a superficial way, but in a way that allowed vulnerability to breathe. Daniel's hand found hers instinctively, squeezing gently. Emma turned to him, seeing the quiet reflection in his eyes. He seemed to be weighing the idea, thinking about how they had both been holding back even from each other. For weeks, their conversations had been limited to the routine and practical. But tonight, with the neighbors here, something had shifted. The tension that had quietly built up seemed to soften just a little. Like snow melting at the first touch of sun, Emma found herself nodding slightly, not trusting her voice to speak without trembling. I think that could be good," she said softly. Her words were barely above a whisper, yet they carried more weight than she had expected. Laura smiled, her eyes reflecting understanding. "We don't want to intrude, but we know how important it is to feel seen, to feel heard. Sometimes you need someone outside your immediate circle to remind you of the love that's still there." Emma's thoughts wandered to the weeks of quiet dinners, of staring across the kitchen table, of passing each other with polite smiles but empty hearts. And now, seeing Daniel laugh quietly at something Michael had said, she realized how much she had missed the simplicity of connection. Sometimes love wasn't about grand gestures. Sometimes it was about someone noticing, listening, and being present when it mattered most. Michael spoke again, his tone calm. "We've had nights like this ourselves where it felt like the world was closing in. But talking, even with others who aren't directly involved, can make a difference. It reminds you why you fight for what's important." Emma's gaze drifted to Daniel. He was looking at her now, not with fatigue or distraction, but with something warmer, something hopeful. She felt her heart stir. It was subtle but undeniable, a gentle tug that reminded her of the early days of their marriage, when they laughed until they cried and shared dreams that seemed bigger than the universe. Laura's voice pulled her back. "We thought maybe tonight could be about that, about remembering the connection you share. And if we can help even a little, then it's worth it." Daniel took a deep breath. I think that's what we need. Not just me and Emma, but all of us. Sometimes it feels like we're carrying too much alone." Emma felt tears prick at her eyes, but she didn't look away. She understood completely. That acknowledgement, that admitting vulnerability wasn't weakness, was the first step to rebuilding what had been quietly fading. She tightened her grip on Daniel's hand, feeling the warmth, the reassurance, the quiet promise that they could face this together. Laura nodded, her smile softening. "Exactly. And that's why we're here. To be honest, to listen, and maybe to help each other remember why we love the people closest to us." The conversation continued, flowing naturally. They talked about the small things, how it felt when weeks passed without meaningful conversation, the frustration of miscommunication, the longing to feel valued and understood. Emma realized how refreshing it was to speak openly, without fear of judgment. Her emotions, usually kept neatly in check, began to spill gently into her voice. She laughed at a joke Michael made about a misadventure during a hike, and Daniel joined in, his laughter deeper and more genuine than it had been in months. The night grew darker, yet the porch light gave the scene a comforting glow. The neighbor's presence was not intrusive. It was supportive. Emma felt a sense of relief, like a door that had been closed for too long was finally opening. She hadn't realized how lonely she had felt, how much the quiet tension had weighed on her, until now. And seeing Daniel relax, letting go of the exhaustion he had carried silently, made her heart ache and swell at the same time. Laura touched her arm lightly, a gesture of empathy rather than intimacy, and said, "Sometimes sharing a moment like this is all it takes to reconnect, not just with your partner, but with yourself, and that can make all the difference." Emma nodded, unable to speak for a moment. She felt an overwhelming mix of gratitude, relief, and a flicker of excitement about the path ahead. For the first time in weeks, she sensed hope rather than HEAVIN. Michael glanced at Daniel, his expression gentle. "We don't need to fix everything tonight, but simply being present, simply allowing ourselves to be honest, that's a start." Daniel smiled faintly, a real smile, not the tired mask he often wore. "You're right. It's just nice to feel like we're not carrying this alone." Emma squeezed his hand again. She didn't need words. He felt it. They both felt it. The simple human connection, the acknowledgement of struggles. The understanding that love required effort was more powerful than any grand gesture. And now, with the neighbors quietly sharing in this moment, it felt almost sacred. The conversation shifted slightly as Laura shared a personal story about her own marriage, the time when silence had almost driven a wedge between her and Michael. She spoke about the fear, the doubts, and the slow process of opening up. Her words were simple, but they resonated deeply. Emma felt as if the story mirrored her own hidden fears. Michael added softly, "We realized that pretending everything was okay only made things worse. The moment we admitted the struggles, we began to heal. That's all we want for you too." Emma's heart ached with recognition. They were speaking directly to the emotions she and Daniel had buried under routines and responsibilities. They were reminding her that love wasn't static. It required honesty, attention, and vulnerability. The four of them fell into a comfortable silence, each lost in thought. Emma's eyes met Daniel's, and she saw a reflection of herself, uncertain, hopeful, willing to try again. The quiet around them wasn't empty. It was filled with possibility. Laura broke the silence gently. "You don't need a perfect night. Just a moment where you're present. That's what counts." Emma exhaled slowly, feeling a weight lift. She realized that tonight they weren't just reconnecting as couples. They were discovering that human connection, even with neighbors, could bring warmth back into a cold week. Daniel leaned closer, his voice quiet but firm. "I think we've forgotten how much these moments matter." Emma nodded, her own voice barely a whisper. "We needed this. I didn't know how much, but we did." The neighbors smiled, their presence unassuming yet comforting. Laura said, "We're glad you're open to it. It's not about us taking anything away. It's about reminding each other that we're not alone in this life." Michael's eyes sparkled under the porch light. "Exactly. And sometimes sharing time like this is all it takes to feel alive again, to feel the connection you thought you'd lost." Emma felt a warm swell in her chest. She looked at Daniel, feeling the familiar pull of love tempered by the wisdom of time and the gentle guidance of friends. It wasn't instant or dramatic. It wasn't a solution to months of quiet tension. But it was enough to remind them of what they were fighting for, what they still held dear. The night deepened. Stars glittered like distant promises. The wind whispered softly through the trees. And the four of them lingered on the porch, feeling the weight of honesty and empathy settle into a comforting rhythm. They laughed together at small stories, shared gentle advice, and allowed silence to stretch without discomfort. When the neighbors eventually said they should head home, Emma felt a strange reluctance. Not because she wanted them to stay forever, but because the night had reminded her of something she hadn't realized she was missing. Genuine connection. The kind that didn't demand perfection. Jess' presence. Daniel squeezed her hand one last time, leaning close. "We needed this," he murmured. Emma rested her head gently on his shoulder, smiling softly. "Yes," she whispered. "We really did." Laura and Michael waved goodbye, their warmth lingering even as they walked back to their own home. The porch felt quieter now, but the energy they left behind wasn't emptiness, was hope, possibility, and a subtle promise of nights to come. Emma turned to Daniel. His eyes were gentle, open, and filled with a vulnerability she hadn't seen in months. "Let's not wait for weeks to feel this again," she said softly. He nodded, a quiet smile tugging at his lips. "No." Emma Wilson had always believed she understood the quiet rhythm of her neighborhood. The soft evenings, the friendly nods from neighbors walking their dogs. The glow of porch lights shaping a small, peaceful world. But that Friday night felt different the moment she stepped out of the shower and heard the house settling in an odd, restless way. She brushed it off at first, telling herself it was just the long week catching up to her. Still, the heaviness in her chest wouldn't go away. She found her husband, Daniel, in the kitchen, staring into the refrigerator as if expecting it to speak. He looked tired, his shoulders slumped in a way she recognized too well. It was the same look he wore whenever he felt lost but didn't know how to say it. "Dinner's almost ready," Emma said, trying to sound cheerful. He nodded, closing the fridge quietly. "Smells good." The conversation ended there, short and thin, like everything between them lately. Their life wasn't broken, just dimmer than it used to be. The warmth that once came naturally now needed effort. And even when Emma forced a smile, it often faded before Daniel even saw it. As they sat down to eat, she tried asking about his day. He answered politely, but without emotion. She tried telling him a small story about something funny that happened at work, but he barely lifted his eyes. These moments weren't new, but tonight they felt sharper. She pushed her fork gently through her food, wondering when exactly they had stopped talking from the heart. There wasn't a single fight or a single mistake to blame. It was more like a slow cooling, something neither of them meant to happen, but both had let slip through their fingers. They were halfway through their quiet dinner when the doorbell rang. A single sharp sound cutting through the heavy silence. Daniel blinked. "This late?" He stood up first. Emma followed him into the living room, confused. They rarely got unplanned visitors, and when they did, it was usually during the day package deliveries, kids selling cookies, neighbors returning borrowed tools. Daniel opened the door, and both of them froze. Standing on the porch were their neighbors Laura and her husband Michael. They weren't holding anything, not food or tools or mail. They simply stood there, wearing soft smiles filled with uncertainty. "Hey," Laura said gently, her voice warm but hesitant. "We were passing by and saw your lights on. We thought maybe you two wouldn't mind a little company tonight." Emma blinked, taken aback. She liked Laura, everyone did. She was the kind of woman who made people feel comfortable without trying. Her husband Michael was calm and thoughtful, the kind of person who listened before speaking. But they had never visited at night without warning. Daniel looked confused but not annoyed. Yeah, sure, come in." Emma wasn't sure why she didn't hesitate. Maybe it was the strange heaviness she had felt all evening. Maybe it was the silence she was tired of. Maybe she just needed people around her, people who weren't drifting away. She stepped aside and motioned them in. "Of course. Make yourselves comfortable." The moment the neighbors crossed the threshold, the energy in the house changed. Not loud, not chaotic, just warm. Familiar voices filled the living room. Soft laughter drifted across the air. And something inside Emma loosened. They all settled around the coffee table. Daniel sat a bit stiff at first, like he didn't know what to do with the sudden company. But gradually his posture relaxed. Laura talked about a new project she was working on at her marketing job. And Emma found herself listening with real interest. She didn't pretend this time. She didn't force the smile. It came naturally. Michael talked about the new hiking trail opening nearby. Daniel perked up at that, asking questions Emma hadn't expected him to ask. He even laughed a small laugh. But real Emma watched him quietly. She hadn't seen that expression on his face in weeks. It stirred something inside her, mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that he could still light up. Sadness that lately? She hadn't been the one to make him smile like that. Laura eventually turned to Emma with genuine curiosity. "You've been quiet tonight. Everything okay?" Emma hesitated. The question was simple, but something in its sincerity pierced her guard. She took a small breath. "Just tired," she answered softly. "It's been a long week." Laura nodded knowingly, but her eyes showed she understood more than Emma said. The conversation flowed easily after that. They talked about weather changes, holiday plans, funny neighborhood moments, and small frustrations that somehow felt easier to discuss with people who weren't family but weren't strangers either. As the night went on, something deeper appeared, small glimpses of emotion behind casual words. Moments where Daniel paused before speaking. Moments where Emma caught Laura giving her a sympathetic look. Moments where Michael's voice carried a weight he tried to hide. At one point, when a comfortable lull settled in, Laura smiled softly. "Why don't we all step outside? It's beautiful tonight." Daniel glanced at Emma, unsure. She felt that strange tug in her chest again, the same one she'd felt since before dinner. But this time, instead of pushing it away, she nodded. "Yeah, let's go." They stepped into the backyard where the sky stretched wide above them. The night air was crisp, smelling faintly of pine from the nearby woods. Porch lights glowed softly, giving the moment a quiet intimacy that felt almost unreal. They stood on the wooden deck, leaning against the railing. For a moment, no one said anything. It wasn't awkward silence. It was peaceful, heavy with unspoken thoughts. Michael looked at the stars. "Nights like this make people honest," he said quietly. Emma felt a shiver, not from cold, but from recognition. She sensed where this was heading, though she didn't know how or why. Daniel exhaled slowly. "Maybe honesty is what we need." Emma turned to him, surprised at the softness in his voice. Laura looked between the two of them, her expression warm but serious. "We've noticed things feel a bit distant with you two lately," Laura said gently. "We don't mean to intrude. We just care." Daniel didn't deny it. He didn't pretend. He just stared at the sky, his voice quiet. "It's been rough," he admitted. "But we're trying." Emma swallowed hard. She wanted to speak, but her emotions were too tangled. Instead, she let the truth sit there, visible for everyone to see. Michael nodded slowly. "Every couple goes through seasons like that. We've been there too." Laura touched her husband's arm. More than once. Their honesty surprised Emma. She didn't expect them to open up so easily or care so deeply. She didn't realize how much she needed to hear that she wasn't alone. That her marriage wasn't the only one that had drifted a little with time. The four of them stood in a soft circle, sharing the weight of the night. There was no judgment, no pressure, no discomfort. Only understanding. "Sometimes all you need," Michael said, "is to let other people in. Even if just for one night." "Emma," breathed in sharply. His words echoed something inside her, a truth she hadn't realized. She'd been avoiding. They stood together under the sky, talking about relationships, communication, how easy it is for love to get quiet instead of loud. Daniel opened up more in those minutes than he had in months. Emma watched him with a tender ache in her heart, hearing his fears, his doubts, his hope. She felt something returning between them, not fully, not instantly, but enough to remind her that their story wasn't over. Laura smiled sympathetically. "You two have something special. Anyone can see it." Emma looked at Daniel. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't hiding behind tired eyes. He was looking at her like he remembered the woman he married. The night wrapped around them softly, like a blanket. Emma didn't know what the next hour would bring, or why her neighbors had chosen this night to show up, or why her heart felt so open and vulnerable. But she knew one thing. Something was changing. something gentle, something emotional, something that felt like the beginning of a healing she didn't know she needed. And then, just as she exhaled, a new silence fell over the porch, a silence filled with quiet expectation. Michael turned toward them, his expression careful but sincere. "There's something we've been meaning to ask you both," he said quietly. Emma and Daniel exchanged a startled glance. The air grew still. The moment deepened. The night, it seemed, had more to reveal.